Brother, please don't close the door. Move to the right.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الله أكبر الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار أجرنا وإياكم من النار أما بعد. Dear respected brothers and sisters, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created each and every one of us from two components. From our father Sayyidina Adam onwards, there are two elements of the human being, right? One is this earthly, materialistic, physical element, right? The clay, the body. And this we share with all creations, right? But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala karram, He gave it a higher status and honor to Adam alayhi salam, and it was a breath from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the soul and nafs. And the ulama, they talk about, these are both required for life, they're from different sources and they require different, let's say, sustenance, ways to maintain them, right? And so if a person is only focused on their physical sense, their body, their needs, their food, their desires, all these things, this is the baha'im. These are the animals, where there's no distinction then between the human being and the animal. So if the person emphasizes that, this is something lacking in their character, lacking in their muru'ah, as they say, this manlyhood, and for the sisters, like this element of how you treat yourself and how you respect yourself and honor yourself. And a person who has the right balance treats both, right? The physical and the soul and the body. And subhanAllah, so today I want to talk about a little bit about how we can feed the soul, right? And this requires, in the most simplest sense, a very, very important form of jihad, striving against the nafs, right? And Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, when he talked about, when he mentioned jihad, he said, what I fear for you is that the first type of jihad you will drop is jihadun nafs, right? When we don't strive against ourselves. This was what he was afraid of, more than anything, right? Because the person who doesn't strive against himself, against the nafs, then the opposite of that is you're just constantly following your nafs, your desire. And وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, the extreme of that is, as Allah described to the kuffar, that's what they do, right? فَأَمَّا مَنْ طَغَى وَآثَرَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا فَإِنَّ الْجَحِيمَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, the one who طَغَى, transgresses and just, pleasing themselves and satisfying themselves, and make the dunya آثَرَهَا, meaning promote it, put it forward, make it the priority. Then their conclusion is Jahannam, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. But the opposite of that is وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ, the one who has fear. And we're talking about fear and taqwa, right? All these things that we need for the jihad nafs, of the status of his Lord. And then what? وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى, and then he starts to push back on the hawa, the desires of the nafs, right? Not just constantly responding to each one of them. فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى, then the Jannah is the final abode. And so, this jihadun nafs, why do I mention this? Because we are approaching the month of barakah, the month of Quran, the month of sadaqah, the month of, hasanat, the month of jihad. This is the month of jihadun nafs. This month of Ramadan is our training ground to commit and to learn and to establish jihadun nafs, because without that, no other form of jihad or good can happen. If I can't overcome my nafs, and again, subhanAllah, Ramadan, Allah makes it as a training ground for all these things, right? There are so many forms of ibadah in Ramadan where it involves striving, the jihad, right, of the nafs. That is the primary kind of element that allows us to do these things, right? And before I just go into that again, just to kind of, we might say, well, subhanAllah, here's Ramadan coming, right? I'm sure we've all heard things like this before, the reminders. But subhanAllah, Ramadan, Allah gives it to us, once a year as a goalpost, as a milestone, a marker to compare ourselves. Because all of us, this is the nafs, and this is something that the Salaf Salih, the old righteous predecessors, they admitted this. We should admit it too. this isn't like a one-time thing. You don't say, Alhamdulillah, I conquered my nafs last Ramadan or the prior Ramadan and I'm good. No, brothers and sisters, it's a constant struggle. It's a constant struggle. Sufyan al-Thawri, rahimahullah, he would say that my nafs, I would fight it constantly, battle. You know, like somebody's trying to wrestle somebody, one time you get on top and the other time you get on top and it's like a struggle. He says, one time I would overcome my nafs, one time my nafs would overcome me. Constantly struggling. So if I'm honest with myself, I know that I'm going to be struggling, and if I did well or bad, last Ramadan I need to do better, right? But I have to be prepared, right? So this constant jihad nafs is something that we shouldn't take for granted. It's something that nobody can claim that I control my nafs and I can be satisfied. That's when the shaitan will creep in. I'll give you another example. Umar ibn Khattab, right? We all know Umar, of course, but look at how he would hold himself accountable. Many examples of how he always constantly checked his nafs, right? And he's known to say, Bakhin ibn Umar. He would say, Ibn Khattab, like, careful, shame on you, right? If you don't have taqwa of Allah, Allah will punish you, right? This is Umar radiallahu anhu, you know. So this is the thing, like, again, we just have to remember, like, this isn't something that we can just take for granted. It takes a lot of effort to strive against ourselves. So what I wanted to focus on a little bit is, okay, Ramadan. This is our training ground. Alhamdulillah, we're about 2 weeks away. But what happens in Ramadan and how do we work on our jihad nafs? Well, obviously the first thing is with, Al-Quran, right? Reading the Quran. That takes jihad nafs. That takes striving against our desires, making the time. And we have so many examples of what the Sahaba did, that is like our ultimate example. How they read the Quran constantly throughout the year, but in Ramadan they would strive to complete it multiple times, right? So this is something that we should set a target and go for. What is my target? What is my goal? And this is going to help me with my striving against the nafs, for sure, right? Tarawih prayer. This is something we have to take time out of our night, right? We're tired, it's a long day, I work the next day. But striving in Tarawih, again, brothers and sisters, like when we compare ourselves to what the Sahaba did, they were humans, but they fought their nafs and they prioritized it. The Tarawih prayer in their time was very different. Umar radiallahu anhu was the first that collected them all again behind an imam. And Sa'id ibn Yazid, radiallahu anhu, he narrates that we would pray in the Tarawih. And Ubay ibn Ka'b and Tamim al-Dari, they were the two imams that Umar set for Tarawih. And he said they would read hundreds of verses each rak'ah. Hundreds of verses, he says. And then we would be like, almost want to put down our weight on something. That's how exhausting it was. But they strove with the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So alhamdulillah, we don't do that these days in our masajid, but do your best to be there, to the end, as a minimum. Yeah. Pray with the imam, because the Prophet ﷺ actually said that the one who prays the Tarawih prayer behind the imam until they leave, Allah, because of course there's so many bounties in Ramadan, but just this one thing, if you didn't know, Allah writes for you the ajr of spending the whole night in qiyam. So we can get the same ajr by the grace of Allah, and we're not spending the whole night in the masjid here praying Tarawih until it's whole time, right? So just remind yourself when shaitan wants you to, in your nafs starts to, because again, go back to this is jihad nafs now. Your nafs is the one that we need to control in Ramadan, because Allah gives us some help in Ramadan, right? The shayateen are chained. We all know that hadith, I'm just trying to focus on jihad nafs, but Allah mentions, the Prophet ﷺ told us in the hadith, right, that the shayateen are chained fi Ramadan, right? The doors of heaven are open, the doors of Jahannam are closed, meaning Allah's making good easy, but our nafs is the thing we have to work on. This is the one thing that each one has, that one hurdle, right? What is my desire? What is my nafs? What am I prioritizing? How can I overcome that? So Tarawih and Quran, these are two training grounds to overcome this. Another one that takes a lot of jihad nafs is sadaqah, giving charity. And alhamdulillah, in Ramadan we find ourselves much more charitable, and alhamdulillah, but that is, we need to overcome our nafs, because throughout the year the nafs comes and prevents us sometimes from doing this, from giving the sadaqah, from giving the charity. And again, Ramadan, let's make it that training ground. The Prophet ﷺ, he was the most generous of all people in all times. But even he in Ramadan, his example was extraordinary, right? Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, he tells us that the Prophet ﷺ, he was the most generous of people. He admits it, like nobody's going to claim from the Sahaba we're already more generous, but he says even in Ramadan, he would become even more generous. And he actually says something very interesting, Ibn Abbas. He says, first, before he says the part of the hadith that we're going to focus on, he says, Jibreel used to come to the Prophet and teach him the Quran or read the Quran with him every night. Okay, this is what he's saying. And then he says, what would happen to the Prophet? He will become more generous than al-rih al-mursala, the wind that is sent. So two things here. First of all, he kind of tied it to his ibadah, his worship, meaning as you strengthen your connection with the Quran, with Allah, the person becomes more able to give, the person becomes more charitable, the person becomes more willing to do good deeds, right? So these are all connected things, right? That's why we're you're finding your nafs in the salah, you're doing jihad and nafs in sawm, it helps you with the charity too. And then the Prophet will give charity, he described like a wind that is sent. right? A good, when there's a wind, something good that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends, like a breeze or something, right? It encompasses everyone and everything. It's not selective. It's not saying only this person needs some and this person doesn't. No, we're just giving, right? Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Right? So this is from jihad al-nafs. This is the fruits of jihad al-nafs, right? These are the things that we will benefit from when we can overcome our nafs. So yeah, giving in charity. And then finally, one more example, something that would be very practical. Again, jihad al-nafs in how we use our senses, right? Our eyes, our ears, our tongue. Definitely our tongue, right? Because the a'mal of the tongue, these lead to Jahannam, wal-'adhu billah. And this is something that we can slip up in. And especially in Ramadan, we have to be extremely careful when we're fasting. We all know the hadith of the Prophet, right? If somebody, insults you or says something towards you that's negative, you don't repeat. Say, Allahumma inni sa'im, you say, I'm fasting. You're restraining yourself, your nafs, because normally a person wants to react, right? That's when if an animal hits an animal, if it's capable, it's going to hit it back, right? The animal doesn't restrain itself. So this is the difference, right? We're humans. Allah gave us this blessing that we need to understand when we can restrain ourselves. It doesn't mean all the time, but in the appropriate manner, right? So the Prophet ﷺ taught us that. So holding the tongue, controlling the tongue, because the one who doesn't leave lying, as the Prophet told us, zur, right, and all these things, then when the Prophet said, what is Allah going to do with his fasting? Meaning that fast doesn't benefit that person. Allah doesn't need our fasting, of course, but the phrase means this fast is useless. Why you claim to be fasting and restrain yourself from food and drink, but your tongue is not being restrained at all? Again, jihadul nafs, jihadul lisan. So all these things, subhanAllah, this is the jihadul nafs that we need. Then we can talk about jihad now, defeating the enemy and spreading and doing all the things that we need, the external jihad. And throughout history, I'll just leave you with this, look at all the magnificent battles Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave victory to the Muslims when? In Ramadan. Right? Starting from the Battle of Badr, Fatih Mecca, Al-Qadisiyah, on and on, until even last time we actually defeated the Zionists, right? 73. That was in Ramadan. So this is what we as Muslims, Ramadan is our training ground. Ramadan is jihad al-nafs. This is the time to work on it. So I just remind you that, keep that as your target. Think about that. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه غفور رحيم. Yeah, brothers, if you can make room in any gaps in front of you to the sides, squeeze in so we can let our brothers come in. Barakallahu feekum, because usually space. You can just squeeze the lines a little bit. Barakallahu feekum. So we are, alhamdulillah, right now, like I said, inshallah, 2 months away. The Prophet ﷺ, when he got close to Ramadan, as he got closer and closer, this is the only time it's recorded that the Prophet would ask Allah to increase in his life. Why? The Prophet knew the reality of this dunya. He wasn't ever asking Allah, give me long life and a lot of money and all halal things, but that wasn't that wasn't his priority. He knew the dunya is a test, and we should know that too. But the only time he would ask Allah to extend his life was, make us reach Ramadan. Why? Because he knows, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and all his sins are forgiven, but he knows the blessing of Ramadan. So we should be similarly preparing ourselves mentally, psychologically, physically, right? In Sha'ban, we would fast a lot in Sha'ban, as Sayyidah Aisha narrated. And so fasting a lot in Sha'ban is preparing ourselves, right? From that perspective, so you don't hit Ramadan and you're just, very difficult at first adjustment. And then by that time you've adjusted to the fasting, but then you've lost out on the qiyam, perhaps in the Quran, because again, all these things need jihad. They all need training, right? We can't just step into a field and say, let's start, right? If you're playing sports or whatever, nobody does that. And so this is the same thing with our ibadat and preparing for Ramadan, right? And I just mentioned very quickly a few things to keep in mind as practical things we should do, little things as a reminder in Ramadan, to increase our hasanat and keep that connection. And just, these are all sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So as much as you can do, do it with the intention of following the sunnah. I want the maximum edge, because Ramadan is all about maximizing your edge, right? That's our benefit, that's our chance, one time in the year, the main chance, right? So little things other than what I just mentioned, ibadat. The Prophet ﷺ, for example, even suhoor, waking up for suhoor. Again, this takes jihad, right? We might want to just eat and sleep and just wake up for Fajr or something, but waking up for the suhoor meal, the Prophet has barakah. You do it, it's following the sunnah of the Prophet, inshallah you're getting hasanat as well. Hastening the futur, eating the iftar as soon as the event starts, water and dates if possible, right? And the ad'iyah, right? When you're breaking your fast, ذهب الظمأ وابتلت العروق وثبت الأجر إن شاء الله. This dua is ذهب الظمأ, you're saying Allah, the thirst is gone. وابتلت العروق, and you purify, you drank some water, you have that water inside of you, ثبت الأجر إن شاء الله, that the ajr will be established إن شاء الله. So you're making dua to Allah to give you the ajr of that day. Of course, talking about charity and community, all these things, sponsoring iftar, of course, alhamdulillah, Muslim masajid, community step forward. But remember, when you're doing that, make it your intention and remind yourself, it's a tremendous reward, brothers and sisters, right? Because the Prophet said the one who gives iftar to the other person, then you get that same ajr that they got. So you're just getting extra ajr by being generous in that sense. Of course, constantly keeping your tongue, as we mentioned, busy. One way to keep away from falling into sayyat and guarding your tongue is keeping it busy with the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Subhanallah, alhamdulillah, la ilaha illallah, Allahu akbar. Things you can do while you're busy, while you're driving the car, while whatever, because we all have our lives here don't stop, right? And of course, especially during the times, making a lot of dua, of course. Especially during the times like right around iftar time. Of course, obviously when the last 10 nights come, we all know, we focus even more, especially on the odd nights. And one of the du'as that I know, we all heard before is, Allahumma innaka afuun tuhibbul afwa fa'fu anni. Get used to start saying it. Don't wait until the night of the 27th when the sheikh comes and says, this is one of the things we should do, and tonight might be Laylatul Qadr, and say this dua. No, this is something we should be constantly saying, and it's a beautiful dua. You're saying, this is what we want from Ramadan, right? What do we want? What is your goal from Ramadan? Our goal is al-'itq min an-nar. You want to be saved from the hellfire. And Allah has on every night, He saves souls from the hellfire. Every night. So from night one, I'm trying to be that person, right? Once Allah frees a slave. So the Prophet said, the word utaqa is a slave, like freeing a slave, right? And the Arabs, the ulama, they say this, like the Arabs, when they would free a slave, a generous person, you would never free a slave and then re-enslave them. They still believe in slavery, but they free someone, they would never re-enslave them. Sometimes they say, go, it's your word, you're free. But an honorable man, a noble man in the Arabs, they would never bring them back because it's like, oh no, now you're coming back, I changed my mind. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Akram Akrameen, right, and the most generous says, I free a slave on that night, that means you're free, brothers and sisters. Allah has decreed that you're free from the hellfire. Imagine that, but that's to the people who have that intention and are working towards it, right? They're remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah make us amongst those. So that's our goal from the beginning of Ramadan, not waiting until the 27th or the 23rd or the 25th. So Allahumma innaka afuun tuhibbul afwa fa'fu anni. Allah, you love to have to forgive, right? So forgive me. So forgive me. And then finally, I'll just wrap up again with, again, we're preparing ourselves. Make sure when you're entering Ramadan, to purify your intention, right? My intentions are, and the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, there's three. I'll wrap up with these. I know we've heard them before, I'm sure, but to remind ourselves of that intention, right? The Prophet said, Man sama Ramadan, whoever fasts Ramadan, imanan wa ihtisaban. He gave these two conditions. All his sins are forgiven. Iman, with conviction, right? We can't be just fasting because it's a thing we've been doing since we're young, and and then wahtisab, and you're expecting that ajr from Allah, no one else, there's no riyah, you're checking your intention. That's man sama Ramadan. Then the Prophet says, man qama Ramadan, the one who brings qiyam in Ramadan, same thing. Right? And then finally, man qama Laylatul Qadr, the one who performs the qiyam on Laylatul Qadr, which we don't know exactly what night it is, but we have a target. Also, Allah will forgive us sins. So Allah is giving us all these opportunities to be from the utaqa. Our job is to prepare ourselves for that. Prepare yourself for that goodness that's coming. Don't wait until Ramadan starts. Right? And like I said, we're only about, inshallah, 2 weeks away. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us all and to make us amongst the utaqa of the nar. If we were not forgiven and slave and free from the hellfire in the prior Ramadan, may Allah forgive all of us and free us from the hellfire this Ramadan. That is your goal, inshallah. My goal, your goal, brothers and sisters. Barakallahu feekum. One of the brothers in the community is inflicted with cancer. He asked us to make a dua for him, so we'll make dua for him and all of the Muslimin, Muslimat, and our brothers and sisters who are in sickness. Ya Allah, give him full shifa. Allah give him full shifa. Allah give him full shifa and return him back to his family. Allahumma shfihi wa khaffif anhu. Allahumma shfihi wa khaffif anhu. Allahumma shfihi wa shfi jami' marda al-muslimin. Allahumma arham mawtana, mawta al-muslimin ajma'in. Allahumma thabbitna ala siratika al-mustaqim. Allahumma ja'alna min ibadika as-salihin. اللهم بلغنا رمضان اللهم بلغنا رمضان اللهم بلغنا رمضان اللهم اكتبنا من عتقائك من النار في رمضان اللهم فك عن إخواننا في غزة في رمضان اللهم ارزقهم نصرا مؤزرا اللهم ارحمهم وعافيهم واعف عنهم اللهم خفف عليهم اللهم اجعلنا ممن ينصرونهم يا رب العالمين اللهم دمر أعداءهم أعداء الدين اللهم زلزل الأرض من تحت أقدامهم وأرنا فيهم عجائب قدرتك إنك على ذلك قدير وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وأقم الصلاة